Geezer bee. Kronos?
Greetings, and welcome to the Modern Alchemist channel. I'm Aubrey Forrest, the Modern Alchemist, and this is Elements of the Saturn Key and Essentials of Practical Alchemy 2018, The Science of Magic. Today's discussion will be on the Piscean Lens. Let's begin. First off, what is the Piscean Lens? This is a concept which I developed over time, and it is essentially based on the idea that there may be distortion in our apprehension of our historical record, meaning that over the astrological age of Pisces, which occupies the last 2,000 years or so, within this age, a certain paradigm was accepted, that what we see in our environment is always as it has been, and this has impacted everything. It touches upon every science, anything to do with our conception of the cosmos, our origin story, how life evolved on this planet, how quickly life evolved on this planet, and any number of other ideas in association with the formation of and the development of our solar system, and the conception of all of our mythologies, all of our sacred writings, and all of our scriptures. Everything is impacted if our perspective is in fact distorted, because we are assuming that things have always been as they are now. So I started asking myself then, what if things were different? What if physically on planet Earth things were different? Would I have to go and look for evidences? Would there be clues that could point me in the right direction? And would there be a few, or would there be a lot? And would these clues be something that would be pragmatic, that an ordinary human being would look at and go, yeah, you know, that is a little bit different, that's weird, that's sketchy, that doesn't make sense, that doesn't weigh out. These were the things that I was looking for, the low-hanging fruit, to see if in fact this distortion exists at all. So, do we have any kind of clue within the mythological record of any people that might point us to the fact that things were different? Well, the truth is, all of them point to the fact that things were different. In fact, all scripture, all sacred writing from every people teach us that we went from one frame of reference to another frame of reference. An Edenic state within a paradisical garden to a place like this where things eat each other and where we have to struggle in order simply to survive. And each of these cultures, regardless of the origin, make an effort through their own mythological record to explain what happened. And what is remarkable about this is that each record parallels the other, retelling the same events from different points of view, with different heroes, but the events are always the same. So what's a frame of reference? Well, from an astrotheological perspective, a frame of reference is something that exists and is externally driven. In other words, that when we look up and out from Earth to the stars, we see and experience something different today than was experienced earlier. We have all kinds of clues to this, The most glaring evidence is our use of the word planet, which comes from the Greek planatia, which means wandering stars, or a wandering star. Not just a wanderer, but a wandering star. And what if, in fact, this was literal? That the Greeks were defining a thing by looking up and saying, Kronos is a wandering star. Saturn is a wandering star. Zeus or Jupiter is a wandering star. Prometheus is a wandering star. These were all called planets to them. But the meaning was a wandering star, a wandering celestial body, a wandering god. Now, that's simply looking at it from a mythological standpoint, but are there other evidences out there, more glaring, more compelling than simply some vocabulary lesson in ancient Greek and its subsequent translations to current English? In fact, there are. One of the more glaring pieces of evidence exists within the community of paleontology, the study of ancient Earth and its rocks, and the study of dinosaurs. Specifically, if you Google search the Dinosaur Problem, what you will encounter is one of the strongest evidences of the existence of the Piscean Lens and its effects of distortion on our perspective of how things are. The Dinosaur Problem is basically this. As it stands with the planet Earth as it is in its current state, with the gravity as it is in its current state, there are many dinosaurs which simply could not possibly have lived. Sauropods, the ones with the very long necks and tails, could not possibly have walked. The brachiosaur, for instance, far too large to actually have been able to sustain itself. And this we know because we've actually found fossilized evidence of their cells and their muscle fibers, and we understand the bones. And we understand that regardless of how big or small you are, there's a certain ratio that exists where muscle is able to exert only so much force. It's just a mechanic of all living organisms on this planet, whether you're an elephant or a human being or an orangutan or a cat. Your muscle fiber density and its ability to move or lift an object or carry your weight is all the same. In other words, there's just so much. And so these animals could not have walked under the gravity as it exists today. Similarly, pteranodons could not have flown under the gravity as it exists today. Now, within the electric universe, there are discussions as to how gravity functions, and we can talk about that later. Specifically, that gravity can go up or down depending upon the energetic state in which the planetary body exists. So that more energy, more mass, more gravity, less energy, less mass, less gravity, right? And it's simply because as more material is accumulated, more material can accumulate on the accumulation. And we actually see this process all throughout nature, in all kinds of systems, materially. You simply need to extract that physical example and recognize that an energetic state functions on the same principles to understand how the overall overarching principle abides. So that's simply the dinosaurs. Now, what about mass extinctions? Mass extinctions also give us an idea that perhaps things are not the same. Specifically, that the world within the framework that could have supported that life, that biodiversity, megaflora and megafauna, and the atmospheric changes that were also present during those times, none of that could exist today, period. The biggest the biggest clue really is lay within the web of life, starting with megaflora, meaning over gigantic plants. Anybody who's ever grown any kind of plant in their home, or perhaps an indoor garden, recognizes that the degree of illumination directly corresponds to the degree of vegetation, and that so much illumination is required in order to achieve vegetation. Like if there's not enough light, plants will not exist. They'll simply die. If there's too much light, certain plants cannot exist, and they too will die. So we have a situation where we have a paleontological record that shows that whole ecosystems existed that could not possibly have existed today because we don't have enough light to support them. And if there's an exchange or transition in illumination within a solar system, you have an explanation for a mass extinction without the need of some giant cosmic hammer and an improbable comet striking the Earth and causing a eternal winter of several hundred years or several years, or who knows what their explanation might be. But you don't require it, because all you have to do is hit the dimmer switch and the lights go out, and with it the ecology changes dramatically. Another evidence which exists is our own evolution as Homo sapiens sapien, and tracking through the lineage that supposedly we share with other species of Homo sapien, whether it's Homo erectus or Homo sapien neanderthalis or any of the others, Cro-Magnon man. The assumption is that there was a chain of evolution that existed. The interesting thing is that many of the pre-Homo sapiens sapien species, Neanderthal man or the Denisovan man, these two species were actually larger than we are today, and they had larger brains, which typically is associated, your cranial capacity and the amount of gray matter you have up there is generally associated with your cognitive ability and cognitive structure. So these were bigger people with bigger brains, and they don't exist anymore, except for in a trace DNA, right? Some folks might wind up, if they do a DNA trace for themselves, the 23andMe, they might show up like 2% Neanderthal man inside of themselves, so they have a little bit of them left over. And yet, we are told in school that what we have done is we are the highest species. We are the ones who have evolved. But the evidence would suggest that, in fact, we have devolved. And of course, scriptural support might suggest that the meek then have inherited the earth, right? A greater species of human existed prior to ourselves. Something happened, and now there's us. Smaller brains, smaller bodies, and no particular strengths or natural weapons to speak of. We're just squishy. But the last thing that I find amusing is if we, as a human race, evolved under this starlight over a period of tens of millions of years, say, from start to finish, then why is it that we still get sunburned? What is it about this star that we have not evolved enough to protect ourselves sufficiently? Why is it that we find ourselves imperiled when presented with too much contact with this star over time? And why is it that we become sunsick? Like you physically ill because of too much light, too much sun. If in fact this is the place we evolved in, this is the light we evolved in over the course of millions of years and tens of thousands of human years of human history, right? So, shedding the Piscean lens. This is a process by which you sit and you evaluate then your every interpretation of everything that you encountered. The reason I say this is because, and why this is the first lesson of 2018, is because it's so important. Because last year, I encountered the Piscean lens to such an extent that it caused me to rewrite everything that I had written to that point. Because I recognized I was not seeing our history, our mythologies, and our play, our human drama, in 3 dimensions, in the perspective of 3 pillars within the Kabbalah, and the implication of the middle pillar. It's so significant. It altered everything. Advantages and insights then is that mythology becomes instantly clearer because you recognize that our positionality relative to the cosmic play was dramatically different. That our perspective, the fact that we were seeing an exchange of electromagnetic dynamic between 3 stars at one point, and that this exchange resulted in spontaneous evolution and de-evolution over periods of time. And that idea of us evolving or devolving over a rapid period in the space of generations instead of thousands of years becomes much more practical and attainable as a concept. Additionally, each ice age can be explained by dropping the Piscean lens. And the mythological characters themselves assume new roles as they assume their proper position within the astrotheological pantheons. And that in and of itself is of extraordinary importance. Because once those characters have assumed their proper place, you can then insert planetary dynamics from an electric universe perspective and see the play take place. So that we begin as 1 star, then 2, then 3, then 2, and then 1. And that's this dynamic which we encounter and which we are left in today. All right, let's talk some science. Let's talk about the Piscean lens in terms of the electric universe. And let's look at it from the standpoint of civilization and what it would take in order to create an absolute and complete collapse of civilization today. And I mean one that would be protracted, one that would endure not just for tens of years or hundreds of years, but thousands of years, so that it would essentially reflect that we as a species had to come to terms with an entirely new system and new rules. All right? So what would it take in order to completely cripple a civilization, bring it right down to its knees? What kind of event would have to happen? Well, in our own history, in fact, we endured in 1859 an intense solar storm. A solar storm, in fact, that if it happened today, it would most certainly annihilate every single bit of electronic equipment that is in use today. Unless it was hardened and protected in some kind of Faraday cage or something on a lead-lined vault in the depths of the earth, I would suggest to you that everything would be gone. Now, in 1859, the Carrington Event was a powerful geomagnetic solar storm, and during that cycle, a huge solar mass ejection took place that electrified Earth's magnetosphere and induced electrical equipment everywhere. Basically, it just blew up. And the stuff that didn't blow up, the generators or the transformers, that didn't blow up, like the telegraph machines, for instance, they remained in operation for hours after the storm, the geomagnetic storm took place. They were charged on the ambient electromagnetism present within the atmosphere itself. So that was a state of affairs of a singular event, and it caused a crippling effect to electronics, as primitive as it was at the time, everywhere. Today, if this would happen, everything that wasn't hardened would be destroyed. Now, what would it take for our atmosphere then to become saturated in electromagnetism? The answer is simple. The answer is simple, and that is, it would just take another star, or two stars, or a closer proximity to a star which was less destructive than our current star. Because if we were any closer than we are now, we would turn into Venus. I mean, it would just cook us. So we don't want that. But if we were in an environment which were saturated with electromagnetism like that all the time, then what kind of technology would develop? And what kind of advantages would the people who were able to actually look at it? Because when an environment is affected by plasma in that way, you begin to see plasma forms within the atmosphere itself. And you can learn a lot of how plasma structures itself geometrically simply through observation. And I believe that is the leg up that our ancestors had. It wasn't that other than, they were certainly smarter than we were, infused with more electromagnetism. It would seem to me that would infuse everything that quickens the intelligence and make you that much brighter. So clearly they had those advantages as well as being able to visually look around and watch within the atmosphere electromagnetic dynamics display themselves. What would be the device then that you would use to structure that energy so that you could make it useful? Well, you certainly couldn't develop devices like we do today, not in the small scale that we have them, because our devices are checking or transmitting small, nuanced bits of electromagnetism through very delicate frameworks. In the past, with an environment saturated with electromagnetism, there are no such thing as delicate frameworks. And so what you would be restricted to then would be a Stone Age, where you would be looking for materials, stone, that were conductive. So you would construct things out of durarite or granite, exactly as we see, or limestone, exactly as we see the Great Pyramids being constructed out of. And it is my belief that they were built during a period in which the environment was heavily saturated electromagnetically, and that they were able to then structure that electromagnetic force to their advantage. How they did it, we don't know, because we're not in that frame of reference. We can only suppose how they did it by using rules like the law of correspondence, in that what we understand as a small geometric structure and how those geometries work, we can then extrapolate to larger geometries and see how those work. But that in and of itself is another thing, another distortion, another effect of the Piscean lens, because we look at these structures without any real understanding as to their genuine purpose, their original purpose, and how they could have benefited anyone. So, when we consider our technology today, it's important to recognize that our technology today, to the regular human being on the street, is effectively magic. I say that jokingly until I recognize the fact that ordinary people do not have it within their means to create a microprocessor. Ordinary people cannot create this phone, or the computer, or this camera, or the equipment and the machines that created the machines which we use today. So if the systems blow apart, then what are we left with? We're left with the memory of being able to do amazing things. And today, because we have this memory and we have this disassociation from ourselves and from our ancestry, because we think, gosh, if they were like us, there's no way they could possibly have done it. It must have been ancient aliens or intervention or Pleiadians or someone from the outside coming in, as opposed to we on the inside being capable of doing it, because we were different before than we are today. One of the other places that the Piscean lens is reflected within, and its many distortions, lay within our understanding of radioactive decay, or the rates of radioactive decay. Specifically, we assume, because of the Piscean lens, because we look around and we say, it always has been this way. Evidence, regardless of the evidence, we insist it has always been this way. And as such, then we plot decay rates for radioactive isotopes and use those decay rates in order to predict or to understand the length of time that may have taken place over the course of that isotope's decay. So that if we have, let's say, a naturally occurring radioactive element like uranium-238, we look at that over time, and as it decays to uranium-235, we have what we believe is a baseline from which we can then gauge other decay rates, depending on the element in question, each of which assuming that the environment cannot influence the rate of decay. If you Google solar flares, radioactive decay, and the age of the Earth together, you will find that there is an extraordinary dialogue taking place right now relative to the nature of how solar influence, or a solar flare, for instance, might affect the rates of decay within certain isotopes. With increased solar activity, decay rates slow down. As solar activity decreases, decay rates increase. So there's a corresponding relationship. Now imagine a world that had 2 or even 3 stars inputting into the system and delaying decay rates by stabilizing these isotopes with an infusion of electromagnetism within the environment. That infusion's absence now, and everything decays today. We decay, the environment decays, not just isotopes which are radioactive, everything breaks down. Our mythological record suggests there was a time when that never happened, and it was a golden age. I submit to you that the Piscean lens then affects a distortion in our apprehension as to how old the Earth is, how old we are, and how old things like dinosaurs may have been, or any other life form on this planet may have been. So what are the consequences of adopting the Piscean lens? Well, you're going to become like me. You're going to wind up reevaluating. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but you're going to wind up reevaluating pretty much everything. You're going to be a bit more skeptical with regard to the foundation upon which many of the sciences are built, because an understanding of the impact of this distortion on our apprehension of everything is simply that profound. It's everywhere. It hits into everything. to the extent that we make so many assumptions today, assuming, for instance, the biggest assumption of all, that the sun has always been at the center of our solar system, and that there wasn't another star that to us may have been the center. Now, our mythological record suggests, in fact, that the sun was not at the center until at last it was fixed there. And that fixing then became the crucifixion. And it is told in 100 different mythologies. Whether you're looking at Horus chaining Set to a rock and killing him in front of all the other gods, or Zeus, same god, affixing Prometheus, same god, to a stone and having an eagle peck out its liver until it turns yellow, right? And it just goes on and on. Again and again, Jesus Christ being fixed to a cross, and the cross, of course, being an intersection of constellations, right? Fixed constellations, cardinal constellations, mutable constellations, and in the center of that, a singular star, fixed. Understanding that we have the flexibility, once adopting the Piscean Lens and understanding that concept, to then look at the world differently, everything else becomes different.